Hello and welcome. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. In Brussels, European leaders have gathered for a critical summit on defence, with the future of Ukraine's security at the forefront. French President Emmanuel Macron warns that Europe is at a turning point in history. Leaders are reacting to the recent freeze in US military aid to Ukraine announced by President Donald Trump. EU officials are pushing for a bold new defence strategy, including a $150 billion loan plan to strengthen military capabilities. While many leaders, including Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, vow to back Ukraine and boost defence spending, divisions do persist. Hungary's Viktor Orban is raising concerns, calling for a shift in EU support for Ukraine. As tensions rise, EU leaders are seeking to bridge gaps left by Washington's shifting stance on Ukraine. We're joined by several guests to discuss this ongoing situation. We're first joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political risk analyst who's joining us from Taipei, Taiwan. We're also joined by Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solution, joining us from Portland. Also joining us is Julia Kazdabina, head of the Ukrainian Foundation for Security Studies in Kyiv. And finally joining us is Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, who is the Director of Communication at the BCMF BRICS Culture Media Forum, and he is joining us here in Delhi. Ross, I would like to come to you first. This meeting that we know, of course, is taking place currently in France. Again, it's a show of unity from European nations, but there is division there. How important do you think it is that the EU leaders are all united in their support for Ukraine, if it aligns, of course, with their wants and needs for the outcome of any peace talks and the war?
Certainly, it's been a significant part of Ukraine's ability to withstand the onslaught from Russia following its invasion in 2022 of European unity. It's been crucial, just like support from the United States has been crucial. European unity and support has also been crucial to Ukraine, and it still plays a significant role in Ukraine's national defense. In some ways, we're seeing a rerun of what occurred in the first Trump term, when Trump was critical of European defense spending as being too low, and specifically with the NATO member countries. And now we have the same accusation from the second Trump administration, but it's also augmented by the need to spend money and continue to provide military aid to Ukraine. So the Europeans are confronting these very expensive and complex issues. Generally, they seem to be united, with some notable exceptions, such as Prime Minister Orban from Hungary.
Yes, Daniel Wagner, I'd like to look at something that we know has happened since the US announced that they were stopping intelligence and, of course, aid to Ukraine. France have said they have stepped up, but French President Emmanuel Macron has been ruffling some feathers, to say the least. The Kremlin have reacted to statements he has made, calling them extremely confrontational. Do you think that Emmanuel Macron is trying to take up the mantle as the leader of this European conglomerate to try and fill the gap that the US have left?
I think it is the case that he would like to establish French leadership for this matter. He has attempted to do that in the past as well. But it's hardly surprising. I mean, when Putin is going to accuse people of reacting to things that he does, I'm not exactly sure what he would expect. This is part of a pan-European effort to stand on their own 2 feet and to produce significant new funding and to produce weapons that they were previously relying on the US to provide and produce. And I think it's admirable that Macron and the Europeans, the EU, are stepping up so quickly. It just goes to show that when you're motivated to do something, or perhaps when you don't have a choice, you get on the horse and start riding. I think we're going to see much more from the Europeans from here.
Julia, coming to you, thank you very much for being here. I also want to look now at comments that have been made by Polish leader Donald Tusk. He said that the EU must beat Russia in an arms race. This could potentially open up conversations of Russia versus the EU sort of understanding there. It's quite provocative language. How do you think that will be perceived by the Kremlin?
I mean, I'm not a Kremlin analyst, right? So I bet based on their previous behavior, I would expect that they would turn on very loud rhetoric. But then you really need to look at their capabilities and at what they can do in response, and whether or not they can actually withstand an arms race like that. Because if you compare European economy and Russian economy, and especially given the hit that Russian economy and its military industry has taken due to the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, I think that Russia can be very loud, but I don't think it can actually do much, or at least a lot less than it would like to. So I think it would be a wise step for Europe to actually ramp up ammunition and weapons production to be able to build a deterrent against Russia, because force is the only argument Russia understands, and to ignore all the loud talking.
Yes, Ross, coming to you next. There is, of course, a situation going on in Europe at the moment. The economies are struggling. Defence spending isn't where a lot of the nations want it to be. So is Europe really in a position to be entering in an arms race with Russia?
It's certainly going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge for the larger or more powerful European countries. And we take the UK as an example. If we go back several prime ministers, and they've changed their prime minister multiple times in the last 5 years, but Boris Johnson, when he was the prime minister, talked a lot about significant military spending. He talked about having a military presence here in the Indo-Pacific region. But there's a lot of pressure to improve the health service, for example. There's other spending priorities that the UK government has, whether that's fighting illegal immigration or other issues. And then the ultimate result is that their military is really not where you would expect it to be, given the powerful assumptions we make about UK's powerful military, but actually it's just not really there at the moment. And in many ways that also applies to France and to Germany as well. German economy is slowing down. They have other spending priorities, and it's going to be difficult for them to dramatically increase their spending. And then for the smaller countries, well, they're smaller. There's only so much they could do, whether from a spending perspective or actually from the size of their militaries.
Yes. We are now joined by Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov. Thank you very much for waiting while I spoke with our other guests. Stepping away very briefly from these conversations that are being had in Europe right now, I want to look at some action that we've had within the last 24 hours. Strikes, deadly strikes, which have specifically targeted Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown. What message is the Russian military sending by attacking the home of the Ukrainian leader?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss with my colleagues with open heart. First of all, I want to tell that the main reason peacemaking dialogue is not positions of economical level development of country or some catastrophe in some material position. The main reason is basic moral principles. Our civilization, our country, Russia, we have our spiritual and historical mission. And we are willing to complete this mission. And Ukraine right now, the identity of the Ukrainian nation, because this nation was so much, was under so much big pressure of European politicians to start with this conflict with Russia. And right now we can see that is a time for Europe wake up and completely realize what is going on ground. And we can see that as a historical chance, we can tell, that all leaders can sit on the round table to start with peacemaking dialogue with a goodwill, real goodwill, for the benefits of all their nations.
Yes,
and
Dr. Dvoryanov, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'd like a specific answer to the question that you were asked. What message is Vladimir Putin sending by striking the hometown of Volodymyr Zelensky?
Yes, this message especially, we can see that, of course, nobody can stop right now Russian army. to complete our mission. Nobody can stop in the world. That is only one opportunity. I'm telling you very frankly, because I can see that right now is a question to be survived to our civilization. It's only one chance, and you see our national leader already take care about the future of our civilization. That's why, of course, the main message to Volodymyr Zelensky, he should start the process of new election, like a proper. We start with legacy of future president of Ukraine, who will be real representative of the will of the nation. It's only one chance, only one way. Because with whom will make agreement, is making agreement. It should be somebody who really today a representative of the nation. Only one question. That is a main problem. That is the main, we can tell that issue, main topic right now, to start our peacemaking dialogue with Ukraine.
Julia, I'd like to come to you and get a response, of course, to the strikes that we have seen in Ukraine. I want to get an understanding of the feeling within Ukraine with these strikes killing people on a somewhat regular basis now. What is the feeling like in Ukraine, given all these diplomatic talks which are taking place, defence summits, talks between Russia and the United States? Do you feel like the people of Ukraine are being forgotten in those conversations with strikes continuing?
Well, the people of Ukraine, I think, are not forgotten. At least we will not let anybody forget about us. The strikes, of course, are an indication that Russia does not want peace. And Ukraine has been engaged in negotiations with Russia for a long time before the war started. And also President Biden tried to talk to President Putin, and there was a lot of diplomacy before Russia launched the full-scale aggression. And the full-scale aggression continues, and they kill civilians. And all this grand talk about some sort of a mission or Ukrainians being under some sort of an influence, this is complete nonsense. Ukrainians are a separate nation that wants to be independent, that wants to live separately from Russia, have our own country, and not be attacked ever again. And for this reason, we need to build a deterrent to stop Russia from doing what it has been doing for the last 3 years, and killing primarily Russian speakers in the eastern parts of Ukraine, killing them in large numbers in their sleep for absolutely no reason.
Daniel.
That's what I want to say. And peace talks need to be peace talks. They need to involve Ukrainian side, European side, because this is about peace in the European continent. And they need to involve security guarantees to make sure that Russia does not do again what it continues to do, despite all the talk about peace.
Yes, Daniel, coming to you next. We know that the EU nations are potentially hatching a plan, a peace proposal to show to the United States. Potentially a meeting between Macron, Starmer, Zelensky and Donald Trump may take place. How important is it that everybody does get around the table, like Julia mentioned? How important is it that these plans aren't made separately and that they're made together so that everybody can try and come at least to a point where peace is a realistic opportunity and possibility?
Well, I'd like to think that this is going to result in something substantive at the end of the day, but I'm not entirely sure that it will, for a very simple reason. Not for any lack of effort on the Europeans' part or the idea that they may have a really good idea to present, but because I think Trump is pretty intent on finding the solution himself, or at least directly attributable to something that he's doing. Let's not forget, with this man's ego, he is gunning for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he doesn't get it by promoting a peace plan that was suggested by someone else. So I'm hopeful that what the Europeans come up with will at least have some influence on the outcome, but I'm not entirely hopeful that whatever they come up with is going to be adopted at the end of the day.
Yes, Ross, coming to you, any peace deal that is agreed upon might need further support from European nations and potentially elsewhere. Sources say that Turkey are potentially ready to provide troops to Ukraine, peacekeeping troops. That is, other European nations, including the United Kingdom, France as well, have signalled they would be ready to do so. How important would that be? And is that something that you think Russia would be willing to let happen in any peace deal agreements?
In the absence of United States troops being on the ground, and obviously Europe is also a viable alternative if they make available sufficient resources. And sufficient resources would include a sufficient budget and sufficient manpower as well. And frankly, some of the European countries might not really be able to do that at the moment. Turkey might be able to do it. Turkey has a long history of this. They even fought in the Korean War, for example. But will France or Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom contribute a sufficient amount of manpower and provide a sufficient amount of budget? That really remains to be seen. And following on Daniel's comments, if it's seen as a European initiative, it would also be an unknown whether or not President Trump would agree to, at a minimum, financially support a largely European initiative.
Dr. Dvoryanov, in terms of the support that Europe is showing to Ukraine, do you think this is detrimental to a peace deal, given Putin's clear message that the EU can't be part of any peace negotiations when they take place?
Frankly speaking, I would like to remind to all my colleagues on our panel discussion that it was a very long and very deep interview between independent journalist Tucker Carlson with our national leader Vladimir Putin about situation in Ukraine, where our national leader explained everything in details, how this even before this conflict, how the Russian like authentic territory, land of Russian emperor, not even Soviet Union, which belonged to Russia, given by Lenin to Ukraine. Everything. I just want to address to all of my colleagues to see this and watch this interview, and their very clear intentions and position of our country. And also at the same time, I can see the sadness, and I feel the similar feelings like my colleague Julia from Ukraine. We are human beings. We completely realize that this war is disaster. That's why Donald Trump, who is very popular right now, and actually this independent journalist Tucker Carlson, he belongs to Republic Party. He is affiliated, we can tell, to Republic Party, the current ruling party of America. And regarding the European politicians, see Macron, what is his popularity? His popularity same like Zelensky, a very low level. And why? Because all his actions, they're not responsible. You see, he is not like a gentleman who is taking care about the future of his nation. He did a lot of mistakes, and that's why I am completely agree with my colleague Julia. She told that we should involve to this negotiation some experts, even spiritual leader we should involve, some scientists we should involve, some historicals who knows history very, very well. And it should be like open mind dialogue without any enmity. We should tell it in practicality. I believe to practicality. See, we should start with some practical steps. Of course, right now Donald Trump is so popular and so powerful gentleman and politician. He doesn't take care about what can be done against him by European politicians, because their position is very weak right now, very weak. And my opinion, we should join to this conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin with good intention, with open heart. And Emmanuel Macron, he still has some chance to be like a real leader who wants reduce this aggressive mood and not increase this conflict. because this, if we again and again repeats these actions, increase this conflict, it will be disaster. I agree with Donald Trump that we play with this with the thought war wall, and that's why we should definitely use this opportunity. Start with some practical steps to stop this war. That is my opinion.
Yes, and Julia, looking at potential negotiations which may happen sooner rather than later, Russia say they expect the US to appoint negotiators for Ukraine talks. How important is it, given the breakdown of relationships between Zelensky, Trump, Vance, how important is it that those US-Ukraine relations are rebuilt to as strong as they can be before these negotiations take place?
I mean, I'm not sure that the relations can be rebuilt given what President Trump has been doing. He has clearly taken the position of the aggressor in this case, and the aggressor is the Russian Federation. And I think we should be very clear about that, despite of all this peace-loving rhetoric that we've just heard. And also the attempts to ascribe the words to me that I did not say. I never said that we should involve experts, historians, or anything like that. I said that negotiation table should involve Ukrainians, Europeans, maybe Americans, definitely Russians, but we need to talk because this is about European security. We will see what can happen. I mean, but at this time, I do not see the U.S. as an impartial party to this, to the possible negotiation. The U.S. at this point is taking a side of the aggressor.
Daniel Wagner, to bring this discussion towards an end, that divide between the US and Ukraine is clearly there. A Ukrainian ambassador saying that the US has joined an axis of evil and aiming to destroy world order. Clearly there are differences there, but in the circumstances that the US is the major part in these peace talks, how vital is it for both parties, Russia and Ukraine, that they keep those relationships in the best place possible, and how could that impact the outcome of any peace deal? We've seen, of course, a shift with US relations with Russia, but do you think that that could continue and those two nations could become further allies?
You know, it's interesting if you think about the emerging bilateral relationship between the US and Russia. It can go in some rather interesting directions and unexpected directions. For example, in resolving issues with Iran and resolving issues with other countries in the Middle East. Russia, of course, has some significant influence in these countries, so it wouldn't be surprising if they went in that direction. I think the guardrails are pretty well established at this point, although it's only been 6 weeks since Trump got back in office. He's made it clear that he wants some sort of détente and rapprochement with Russia. And having gone down this path, it's hard to imagine that he's suddenly going to shift gears. Similarly, where Ukraine is concerned, I don't think there's anything that Trump won't do to ensure that Ukraine comes to heel, if you will. In fact, he's even negotiating with some of Zelensky's opponents at this point. In fact, former Prime Minister Tymoshenko. So I think this is unfortunately going to unfold in a negative direction for Ukraine from a negotiation perspective. And again, my hope is that there are more and more parties brought to the table to try to resolve this issue and come up with a viable and enforceable peace plan.
Ross Feingold, to end our discussion, I want to circle back round to the meeting that is taking place in Brussels as we speak. Do you think, in your opinion, that this meeting is a last chance saloon for European nations, not just to be part of any peace deal, but also potentially to protect themselves in case of any further escalation?
No, I don't think it's a last chance to reach those kinds of agreements. I mean, we've seen from the last few weeks that the European leaders have the ability to gather together on fairly short notice. So if they need to keep meeting, I would think they'll keep meeting, whether that's once a week or several times a month. remains to be seen, but I wouldn't call it a last chance. Unfortunately, the war has gone on for 3 years, and unfortunately, the war might continue for an unknown period into the future while the Europeans continue to discuss a possible framework for peace and for cooperation, including a peacekeeping force on the ground. And the United States is simultaneously trying with its own initiative, talking directly to Russia, and hopefully Trump and Zelensky will patch over their differences. But I wouldn't call it Europe's last chance, because they do have the ability to convene and take action when they really want to.
Thank you very much, Ross, for your insight. Also, thank you to Daniel, Julia and Dr. Dvoryanov. The war between Russia and Ukraine and the situation surrounding it is evolving every single day, and we will be here every day to bring you the latest.